So once again, thank you to everyone for being here. Please enjoy the reception, and let us please welcome Stephen Foster.
Thank you. I didn't know one of my groupies was here. Usually my groupies have blue hair. So it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation. I want to talk to you today about a few medicinal plants that I think need to be revisited in terms of their potential use. And I started my career in 1974 at the Sabbath Day Lake, Maine Shaker community, and their herbal business there dates to 1799. And I basically went through a 4-year apprenticeship there and worked in their herb department and did 3 acres of herb gardens and harvested medicinal plants from 1,900 acres there. But I was always exposed to the historical aspect of herbs during that time, and that was a period of time when people were not interested in medicinal plants. Departments of pharmacognosy and medicinal chemistry were disappearing from all of the pharmacy schools in the United States. Norman Farnsworth at the University of Illinois, Chicago, the late Norman Farnsworth, used to use a rubber stamp on his correspondence that said, "Save the endangered species pharmacognosy." So in 43 years, I've watched this industry go from utter obscurity to mainstream and then off into lots of different tangents. So I have some questions for you. Speculation and exports of what native tree species provided funding for late 16th century Virginia colonies? Sassafras. And this is an English edition of Nicholas Minardi's Joyful News Out of the New World. Now, you remember that Columbus arrived in the Americas in 1494. That was 2 years after the Chinese arrived in 1492. But he brought smallpox to the Americas, he and his men, and then he returned to Europe with something attributed to his sailors that became known as the French pox, which the year after Columbus returned in 1495, the French armies invaded the city-states of Italy, and there was this unprecedented outbreak of syphilis in Europe. And it was called the French pox because of the invading French armies. So early exports from America to Europe in terms of medicinal plants was looking for a cure for that virulent form of syphilis that theoretically came from the Americas. So sassafras was one of them. The Virginia colonies were in part founded and funded on sassafras speculation. This is the first illustration of sassafras. And sassafras, I think, is an herb medicinal plant that we should revisit. Safrole, the chief chemical constituent of the oil of sassafras, which is responsible for the flavor and fragrance, was banned in 1960 under the Delaney cause of the Food and Drug laws because it was found to be carcinogenic. So safrole has not been used for flavoring root beer since 1960. Well, harken back to the 1970s, and this new herbal business is evolving. And there are these products called herbal teas, and the FDA is sitting there in Washington scratching their head going, what are we going to do about these products? Well, we have the food additive provisions of the Food and Drug Law from the 1950s. So let's define a cup of hot water as food, and sassafras bark added to the cup of hot water as a food additive, with the intent being to deliver saffrol, a banned food additive, to a cup of tea. So that's what the FDA attempted to do, but 3 tons of sassafras bark rotted in a federal warehouse in San Francisco, so the case was thrown out of court and was never resolved from a legal standpoint. Now, there's a question as to whether saffrol actually is found in sassafras tea or not. There's a series of studies done by Michael Balick and colleagues at the New York Botanical Garden looking at other members of the Lauraceae, particularly cinnamon species in Micronesia, particularly on the island of Ponape. And there's an endemic cinnamon species that they drink every morning that is full of saffrol. The essential oil in the plant bark is full of saffrol. Yet, after they decoct the tea, simmer the bark, there's no saffrol left in the tea. So it's either degraded by heat or evaporates. So we need to take a new look at sassafras as a possible medicinal plant. Sassafras flowers have a wonderful citrus taste. This is, you can get beavers to help you harvest sassafras bark. And we think of sassafras as a small scrub tree, but it can get to a very large tree in the Ozarks. This is in the Sylamore district of the Ozark National Forest. It was 5 feet in diameter at the base. There was talk earlier today about, how to deal with invasive aliens. So here's one here, garlic mustard, Alliaria petiolata, and it has chemical components that are found in both garlic and mustard, hence the common name, and it's a serious weed that is really bad for open woodlands and an annual that gets rid of a lot of native plants. It's a real problem. I was working with a graduate student at the University of Arkansas. She was working on this plant as an invasive alien, and I said, have you ever looked at the history of the plant and its medicinal value? She had no idea that it had any value, but in 18th century England, it was known as sausalone, and it was a plant that was a survival food or famine food when nothing else was available. And looking at the literature, all roads led back to William Salmon's Botanologia, published in 1710, and he has 5 pages of recipes and uses for garlic mustard in this book. Plantain, Plantago major, native or non-native, and it's instructive to look at the historical literature to find out when we first learned about certain plant species in North America. This is Peter Kalm's travels into North America. Kalm was a student of Linnaeus. Linnaeus sent him to North America for a 3-year period in the late 1740s and 1750s. Most of the North American plants that are included in Linnaeus' Species Plantarum, which is this starting point for plant taxonomy, were collected by Peter Kalm. So Kalm, in a entry, September 26, 1748, says the broad plantain or Plantago major grows on the high roads, footpaths, meadows, and gardens. Mr. Bartram had found this plant in many places on his travels, but did not know whether it was an original American plant or whether Europeans had brought it over. And apparently native groups called it white man's foot because it followed white people wherever they went. Now, I've heard this story throughout my herbal career, and finally I found the source of it in the Linnaeus students' travels in North America. And Peter Kalm also went to upstate New York, where he met Walter Johnson, who was appointed by the British Crown to basically control the economics in upstate New York. And he had bought an Indian recipe for a sure cure for syphilis. And Peter Kalm sent this plant back to Linnaeus, and when he returned to Sweden in 1753, he published a paper in Swedish on the use of Lobelia syphilitica as a treatment for syphilis. It's never been translated into English. But Lobelia, the genus Lobelia, had a profound effect on the history of plant utilization in North America, because Lobelia inflata, or Indian tobacco, was used by a self-taught physician named Samuel Thompson, who lived from the late 1760s to 1843, and he developed the first patent medicine, which was a system of medicine called Thompsonian medicine, which he sold by subscription to families for $25 per family. And so in an America of 1830, there's about 20 million Americans and 2.5 to 3 million adherents to the Thompsonian system of medicine. So if you lived in 1830, Samuel Thompson could have been your gynecologist. It's a rather dour figure. You know, the internet as a place for herbal information, I often think of WWW as standing for the World Wide Wasteland, where anybody can publish, quote unquote, publish without benefit of editorial or peer review, anything they want. But one of the great things about the internet is now you can download millions of public domain works that were only available in rare libraries. So I have a copy of 1835 Boston edition of Thompson's New Guide to Health, a hard copy, and then I have a digital copy on my iPad with my digital fireplace in the background there. Along with Sassafras, sarsaparilla was also sought as a syphilis cure and early export from the Americas. The problem is, even today, 5 centuries later, I defy anybody in the herb trade to tell me what sarsaparilla is, what the source plant for sarsaparilla is. So we have several species of smilax in the Ozarks that we call capbriars, and we think of them as nasty weeds because they tear us up and they cause pain. Many of them are well armed. But William Bartram, in his travels in North America, this is the London edition from 1794, describes going into a native village and being given a jelly-like product that was very delicious, made from Smilex roots. So the genus Smilex is something we should look at as a food plant and possibly a medicinal plant. On the internet, there are two sources you can go to, the biodiversitylibrary.org, which has like 147,000 public domain titles on various topics. And also archive.org, which has, not to be confused with archive.com, has over 10 million items. So on my portable computer there, I have all of the important 16th and 17th century British herbals. I've got an antiquarian library of about 4,000 volumes on my portable computer. Okay, what Missouri native plant caused Thomas Jefferson to intervene in a patent dispute? Nobody knows this one. Oh, maybe Tommy. Oh, Susan. Oh, good. Okay. There was a botanist in early 19th century America called Charles Whitlow, and there was a paper on him published in the Archives of Natural History 3 or 4 years ago. Charles Whitlaw, botanist, horticulturalist, charlatan, and quack, which tells you something about him, but he talked another botanist into naming a nettle after him, which he called Urtica whitlowii, and then patented it with the U.S. Patent Office. So Thomas Jefferson, as president, is hearing from his constituents saying, hey, all the boys in the neighborhood are upset about Mr. Whitlaw's patent on this nettle species for making fiber, and they're paranoid that they're not going to be able to use their Apocynon cannabinum or Indian hemp, which is also common in Missouri, as a fiber plant anymore. And the plant species is wood nettle, Laportia canadensis, that not many people know much about. It's a plant that should be researched. It too is well armed. It's in every river bottom in this part of the country. What native plant is America's most important neglected economic plant? And of course, this is a matter of opinion. This is the first picture that actually depicts the use of this particular plant from a debris plate in a book published in 1591. And the natives in Florida are using this beverage basically for ceremonial cleansing purposes. So you can see the action of the guy up in the upper right-hand corner. He's kind of having a reaction to this particular plant, which they made into an extract before going into battle as part of a ceremonial cleansing. And this is a very common plant in American horticulture in the South. It occurs from Texas to the Carolinas and into Virginia, and was the beverage plant of all native groups of the southeastern U.S. and was traded to the north, like in Cahokia, for example. It's called Yaupon holly. The problem with Yaupon holly, however, is that when the keeper of Kew Gardens in 1789 decided to name the plant, he based it on the ceremonial observations and called it Ilex vomitoria. So here's a study just 3 years ago in economic botany, where a grad student went out and basically did a survey of yerba mate, Ilex paraguayensis users, and kind of a blind taste test between mate and and the Yopon holly, and everybody liked the Yopon holly better, basically, until they heard the scientific name of the plant. So I don't know what to do about this from an economic standpoint, but there are now several companies in Texas and Georgia making Ilex vomitoria tea products. It's America's only caffeinated plant species, and is high in a range of antioxidants. Okay, what's the most important economic plant, tree in the Ozarks? Black walnut. This center grew up on black walnut and is still doing research. About 25 million pounds of black walnuts are processed in the Ozarks, mostly by one company, the Hammond Manufacturing Company. What led to a tenfold increase in the price of Goldenseal root in the late 1990s? It actually helped to create United Plant Savers. It was after the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act was enacted in 1994, and all of a sudden, by 1997, the price of Goldenseal had gone from traditionally $8 to $10 a pound to over $100 a pound at the wholesale level. Well, about this time period, companies started testing for illicit drug use in urinalysis. And there was this folkloric notion in American culture that Goldenseal would mask the results of urinalysis for drug tests. So the demand spike occurred because of the trucking industry, and Goldenseal tablets and capsules started showing up at every truck stop in America. And so the price went way up. And there's Goldenseal in fruit, Goldenseal root, and this is the person who caused Goldenseal to be associated with chemical analytical problems in the American mind. This is John Uri Lloyd, a manufacturing chemist in Cincinnati. He and his brothers created the largest medicinal plant library in the world at 917 Plum Street in Cincinnati, the Lloyd Library and Museum, with over 250,000 volumes. But John Uri Lloyd also wrote 8 novels. And this is a murder mystery in which somebody is accused of poisoning another person with strychnine, and the heroine of the story, who is the student of the chemist who testified at the trial, who said that there was strychnine in the stomach of the deceased. She did an experiment and showed that if you mixed Goldenseal and opium together, it produced the color reaction for strychnine. And the deceased took bitters every morning with Goldenseal and a little opium in it to take the edge off the day. So that's how the notion that Goldenseal mass drug tests came into the American psyche. There's a whole body of veterinary literature where in the 20th century where racehorse owners attempted to mask morphine use in racehorses by adding Goldenseal to the feed. Okay, which 2 woody plants native to Missouri are sources of FDA-approved over-the-counter drugs? And they need to be further researched. One of them is witch hazel, Hamamelis virginiana, seen in flower here, but in the Ozarks, we also have Hamamelis vernalis vernal witch hazel, which starts blooming in southern Missouri in the last week of December, first week of January, effectively ensuring that we have something in bloom year-round. This is harvested commercially, but as far as I know, nobody's ever done any chemical or pharmacological work on on this particular species of witch hazel, which also has great horticultural selection possibility. This is Hamamelis vernalis form carnea from Ozark County, Missouri, which has beautiful red flowers. The other OTC drug is slippery elm bark. So both witch hazel and slippery elm are over-the-counter drugs. Slippery elm will soon be coming into bloom. As I was driving up here from Arkansas, I could see at the top of trees, especially along riparian areas, that the buds were forming. And so by the end of March, slippery elm will have already fruited out. And the leaves, it's technically a little bit of a difficult plant to mill, as Dawn can probably tell us. The National Fire Association used to use slippery elm bark milling as an example of an explosive plant material in a milling process. If you heat it up too much, it blows up and bursts into flame. And finally, what native plant, Missouri native plant, had the most profound effect on Abraham Lincoln's childhood? White snakeroot. That's good. Eupatorium rugosum, which is now called Ageratina altissima. And it produced it confounded scientists for over 100 years. White snakeroot produces a set of symptoms that was known as milk sickness or trembles. And it only occurred in rural areas, mostly among small farm holders with 1 or 2 cows, because this plant grows in open woods. And it contains a series of chemical components that are highly toxic to the nervous system. And it's imparted through milk or butter. So Abraham Lincoln's mother died when he was 9 years old from milk sickness. 2 weeks before that, both of her parents died from milk sickness, and a cousin of Abraham Lincoln's. I was visiting a friend of mine who is actually a PhD graduate of this program here, of the Agroforestry program at the University of Missouri, at his house a couple of years ago. And he raises goats, and they milk the goats. And they were drinking about a gallon of goat's milk a day, the family. A family of 4 kids, mother and father. And he told me that he had stopped drinking goat's milk because it started making him sick in the spring. And then he talked about a goat that he had that he took to the vet, and the goat couldn't stand up anymore. It had no motor function. And the vet thought it was an idiosyncratic bacterial problem of some sort. And he started describing some of the symptoms, and I said, these are the classic symptoms of milk sickness. And you have Eupatorium rugosum, white snakeroot, growing all around your pasture. And he eliminated the plant, and that eliminated the problem. But this killed thousands of people in the 19th century in America as small families began to move westward. So the historic record has a lot to teach us about medicinal plants. I've written 18 books. I have a Peterson Field Guide to Medicinal Plants that came out in 2014. I also write papers for Herbalgram, the Journal of the American Botanical Council in Austin, Texas. If you go to herbalgram.org, you can find information on ABC, and after you join United Plant Savers, you can join the American Botanical Council while you're still online. And this is actually a third edition. The first edition on the left was published in 1990, and the second edition in 2000. And I'll leave you with a thought about the explosion of interest in medicinal plants in the period that this book was published. In 2000, if you do a PubMed search for papers with echinacea in the title of an article up to 2000, there's about 80 some odd papers. Between 2000 and 2013, when I finished writing this book, there were 580 some odd papers in the scientific literature with echinacea in the title on a PubMed search. So the entire field has exploded, and it's a wonderful time to learn more about medicinal plants. Thank you very much.